Before you can get started in coding, you have to have your database set up. Installing the database is covered in the YouTube video that's already out there. So you have the link to that. It's in the announcements. Go up and check that for installing MySQL. That'll take you through installing the database as well as getting the command line set up, getting the command line property set up. So I can do things like MySQL right here, and it'll tell me access is denied because I need to type in a username and password. So what I'm going to do is MySQL-u-user, my user's root, if I can spell it, -p for the password, and then you type in whatever password you created when you set up MySQL as a database. So I put that in there, and I'm connected to MySQL. Now I'm going to do a show databases, and with a semicolon after that indicates my command is done. And you'll see I have some default databases that was set up as the test databases. Now, I need database to set up. I've provided that to you in the instructor documents that's out there. You should be able to load that. So if I do an exit of this real quick, I'll leave MySQL, and I need to be in the folder where that file is, which I'm not right now. I downloaded it, so it's probably in your downloads folder or wherever it's going to be. So I'm going to go cd downloads, dir, and you can see there's sales.txt right here. There's the file right there. So I can do dir sales star, and there's sales.txt. I'm in the same folder. Now I'll do MySQL-u root -p for password, type in my password, and now I'm connected. So very simply, I can do source sales.txt, put a semicolon at the end of that, and it installed my password. I can say show databases again, and there's my sales. I can say connect to sales, which then puts me into that database, so all the rest of my commands will be as part of that database. And I can say show tables. So now you can see I have a customer and a product table. If you're not familiar with SQL commands, there's lots of tools to get you familiar with that. I'll show you the exact same SQL commands we can put into code in a little bit. Right here, I can say select star from product. And now you can see there's my products. There's the information. It tells you the structure of this. Again, you're welcome to use MySQL tools, anything you've learned in separate classes. I will use command line tools because I don't want to require you to be familiar with all this fancy stuff. You can see exactly the commands I'm typing in, nothing additional to install, nothing to copy from there. This is the exact commands that are here. They'll also be the same commands we'll use in Java. That's my motivation, is to try and align us as closely to what we'll do in code as possible. Because what I can do is I can take this command, I can select it, copy and paste it, put it in my Java. Or I can take my Java SQL, I can select it, copy and paste it back inside of here and execute it. So that's going to give me some tips later on. So now that I know my database is here, I need to connect to it. And so I'm going to start a new project, a plain old Java application. We don't need anything special to connect to databases. It's part of core Java. And so this is JDBC demo. That's a lot of capital letters to start a project name right there. So JDBC demo. Don't need to do anything special for the main application. We just need to be able to connect to this database. So in order to connect to the database, I need to start to get a connection. Control space, connect, connection exception, right there is what I want. Now notice there's many different types of connections. The concept of connection is not unique to databases. It's used as part of different concepts of communication, but make sure you import java.sql.connection. It's an interface. It's not an implementation. It's an interface. So make sure you get the correct one, otherwise things won't quite work right down the road. So connection, I'll call it con for the lack of better anything else, is equal to driver manager, control space. You can see it imported up above. Driver manager showing up above. Dot. Driver manager has some static methods inside of it. I don't have to create an instance of it. I can, I just don't have to. But the static ones that's most important, you can see up top, is get connection. And I'm going to use the option with username and password because my database requires a username and password because that's good practice. You're probably going to have to do it eventually. We can start playing with it now. So to connect to that, let me start. I'm just going to create it separate so we can see it on its own. You call it URL is equal. The URL for this is jdbc : MySQL : pardon me, localhost. What was that here? I think it's 3306 if I remember. How do I know that? I kind of stuck in my head because I've typed it a bunch of times. That may or may not be correct because I haven't done it in a little while. But we'll find out here in a second. And then what do we need? Well, we need to get to our database. So remember the name of this database that we created inside of here was sales. I can do capital or lowercase. I'm going to do lowercase so it matches. But it could be either way because I think it's case insensitive right there. And that's my connection string. This most important thing is to remember it's the protocol, the database you're connecting to, the driver that's going to look up. This right here is mostly going to be formatted based off the driver you choose. If you need to look up information, you're going to find it based off the driver. This is the server you're going to. I'm using localhost because it's on my machine. This database could be located in some sort of server farm. I could have an IP address. I could have a server name, anything that's inside of here. And then most of the protocols require a port name number because I can have many database instances running on that server. And they can be put on different ports. And then the database I'm connecting to after that. So now, when I say get connection, I want to connect to the URL with a username of root. I'm going to use for the moment, and then test is my database connection password because it's easy and I can type it all with my left hand. So notice now that I try and connect the database, I must be able to do it. If I have the wrong URL, it won't connect to the database. If I have an invalid username password, it won't connect to the database. If I'm not allowed to access that database, it won't connect to the database. If I can't do those things, I can't work with the database. Thus the exception. So I need to Alt-Enter and add a throws clause to this. Now, this is all the code I want to write right now. I want to see, can I connect to my database? And so when I go off and write this code, I'm hoping it comes back, and it didn't, but I'm hoping it comes back with successful. I got an exception out of it. So what's the exception I saw right here? Well, no suitable driver found for JDBC : // that's right. I forgot a key step. Remember, Java.SQL is built into Java, but connections to MySQL aren't. Connections to Oracle aren't. Connections to DB2 aren't. Connections to Sybase aren't. Connections to SQL Server aren't. I need to go to the library and add in the correct driver. Good news here, since we're using MySQL, I can say add library over here. Right click on libraries, say add library. It pops up these global libraries that comes with NetBeans. And one of these, hopefully down here, is MySQL JDBC driver. Just how happens that MySQL is owned by the same company who makes NetBeans, which is the same company who owns Java. And so they are conveniently put it in there for me. So now my library is added to my project. My project automatically adds it to the class path, which is the stuff available to Java when this program runs. And so now when I run it, it runs without error. Let me just note here, let's say I did something wrong. Let's say I did 3316 here. I had the wrong port number. When I run this, I would end up with something along the lines of a communication link failure. Last packet was at 0 milliseconds ago. Driver has not received any packets from the server. Says I have the wrong server name, or in this case, port number right there. Let's say I have the wrong database name inside of there. I just put dsales outside of there. Run that. Unknown database. So I was able to connect to the database server. I got there, but it doesn't know about any database called dsales. So I need to be able to put that out there properly. Let's say I had the wrong username password. Access is denied. So there's a series of exceptions that hopefully are a little bit informative of what's the matter with you getting to your database. As long as you run these 2 lines of code and it comes back with no trouble, then you were able to successfully connect. And that's what I want you to do right now. Don't even bother writing a line of code if you can't get past these two. If you can't get these 2 lines of code to work, because nothing else will make it work. This is all about configuration getting this URL right, getting the username and password right, and then getting your database set up properly. The one little trick I'm going to throw in here before we go is I don't want you using root and test, because that's not necessarily what you called yours. I want you to be using the user out here. You remember, there's a file out there. I mean, there's actually a file out there for you to use that has been uploaded, and that file creates the user CTU Online with a password of student. And so that's what I want you to use here is the database of CTU Online, a password of student inside of there. Now, when you run this, it should also run successfully if you've set up correctly using that file. That username password works on mine because I already have mine set up. But if yours does not work at this point, then basically just go out to that file, copy those lines of code, and then paste those into where you're logged in as root. So you can see right here, I'm going to, nope. I'm copying these. I'm pasting, there you go, I'm pasting these inside of there, and then I can execute them. My first line didn't work here because I've already created the user. Mine's been created for a long time. The second line worked fine because I can always update the permissions. So that's the last step. I want you to be able to connect to the user database using C2 Online and Student. Once you have this, you're good to go, and then continue on.